we are going to learn this afternoon. She also has an MBA from Harvard Business School and has access to the source code of Windows. So all techies out there, get your ears and minds open. Let's learn and absorb as much as we can from Miss Paula Januszkiewicz. Please take the floor.
Absolutely.
Ms. Paula Januszkiewicz, are you hearing us okay?
Yes, I can hear very well.
Perfect,
all good.
Very good. We are all ready and we're all excited to hear your presentation. I must admit, while reading through your bio, I was already getting my mind ready to absorb as much information as I can, so please take the floor and let us all learn together.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this. And to be sincere, I could not introduce myself better. So you said it all. And that's absolutely fantastic. So yeah, as you guys could see, I'm engaged in cybersecurity market for quite a while. And today we're going to talk about how to hack and then defend the endpoint, especially taking into consideration the current perspective that we got that is related with the remote work. And first of all, I would say simply, let's have a look at some statistics just to give us a little bit of a background about what's happening right now. And we've got International Workplace Group report, and these guys said that 50% of employees right now globally are working outside of their main office for at least 2.5 days per week. That, of course, is the response to the current situation, and I guess it's going to be even more of us working remotely, and that's, for example, what our team is doing right now. But long story short, when organizations are struggling for various aspects, various solutions for their employees and their remote work, then of course hackers at that part do not sleep. And that is something that we're going to be talking about today. So whenever we are thinking, of course, about the concept of the remote work, there are a couple of challenges that first let's talk about a bit of a theory before we get into the practice. But these challenges are simply related with different concerns and different situation aspects that are showing us that eventually when employees are working from home, they need to have an impossibility to share data with other users. And what is interesting about that is that eventually when we look at the statistics again, we've got an organization which is called Identity Theft Resource Center, and that organization actually said that since 2005, there have been over 10,000 serious breaches publicly reported that are related with data. So that kind of a rapid shift to remote work without really well-established protocols, solutions will likely create even more opportunity for cyber criminals. Also, when we take into consideration some other challenges, we've got some organizations like, for example, CISA or eventually Checkpoint or Microsoft and so on, and they are issuing alerts encouraging organizations to take a high-end approach to cybersecurity. So why do we need that? Because sometimes these are quite generic comments. Well, simply we need it because eventually we've got well, another motivation to get maybe even higher cybersecurity budget. But on the other hand, if there are organizations that did not really focus on pushing on higher state of security within the organizations, that is a really good reason to do it. So long story short, whenever we are thinking about some other aspects over here, we've got the need of access to the business applications. Therefore, for example, when the employees are connected using, let's say, VPNs, then we are also focusing over here on the shadow IT. And shadow IT in general, these are the projects that are conducted in the organization out of compliance usually. That means that we've got a possibility from the hacker perspective to even have a closer look into what's happening inside the organization, because we're going to use the let's say user workstation as a hub workstation, and then we're going to jump into organization's infrastructure and then verify, of course, different vulnerabilities being out there. So every industry has like compliance regulations as well that employees must observe to stay in a good legal standing. But at the same time, we've got a very specific times, and that remote work concern is something that we definitely should take into consideration. consideration. So what do we have there as a problem? Well, first of all, VPNs that we mentioned, they are, as we mentioned, are they bringing the shadow IT scenario. But the second part, it's related with the VPNs within the need to be 24/7. So long story short, that is something that also could bring some problems to the field, because eventually these particular VPNs could be for some reason outdated. Yeah, of course that it doesn't mean that it's going to happen to every organization, but this is a general concern that we got. So we've got as well things like phishing emails, and that is also a really big concern, because it introduces us a situation where eventually we've got the moment where the user gets phishing, could be, for example, related with COVID, and then eventually we could here bring in some code that could run potentially as a user, and I would like to show you a couple of examples today, live examples today of such, and eventually run the code in the name of the user. Now we've got as well organizations that are here not using multi-factor authentication, and then also this is something that brings me to one conclusion, that eventually we've got certain like, so I was doing the pits for the 6,000 organization, 6,000 people, and then eventually what I was doing, I was targeting them with the password spray attack, and that password spray attack was related with the just using a simple password, company name, and then 2020 as a password, and then I managed to get access to 29 accounts, and then eventually that 29 accounts was something that allowed me to bring phishing to the next level, because eventually we were able to at that stage use just accounts of people that were working in this particular organization. Yeah, so this is the setup. Okay, so we got this. Now whenever we look at the statistics that are related with the remote work, then that's also a bit of a challenge, because when we got remote work by numbers, eventually we can see over here a situation where we've got 56 and 51% of people that are engaged, while for example running their solutions from the laptop, desktop and laptop. Yeah, so this is also something that shows us a direction where we should apply our security. While when we look at some other statistics over here, we are able to see that eventually we've got 81% of people that are actually using a personal electronic device for work-related functions, which also shows us that where the potentially threat might be, while at the same time 31% of those are actually connecting to a company via free or public Wi-Fi connection, and at the same time 46% they actually use their personal device, and at the same time they let someone else use it. So this is a very interesting perspective that shows us that eventually problem is there, and the question is of course how we are able to protect the endpoint in order to see, in order to understand what potentially could be the problem. So what I would like to show you today, it's a couple of demonstrations where our job is going to be to set up different security settings within a workstation. We're going to dig into phishing, but then as well we're going to dig into for example the security of the antivirus, and therefore when we are discussing the antivirus solutions, we're going to be wondering whether we can actually stop it or not, and what's the reality around antivirus to pay a closer attention. So long story short, let's see and let's dig in what kind of possibilities we've got. First of all, let me bring the machine where we're going to be learning if we are actually able to stop the antivirus or not. So over here we've got a situation where eventually in here I got a solution which I called Macavio. Yeah, this particular solution we can start. So let's technically do it right now. And within the Macavio solution, we're going to be wondering whether we can stop it or not. Of course, from my perspective, it's just representing 40% of antivirus solutions in the market, because you can either create a service within the antivirus solution that could be potentially stopped, or eventually at that certain point well, it could be either stopped, or eventually it could be within the service we could program that that particular service was not supposed to be even able to be stopped. So that's something that I would like to show you over here. So let's dig in and let's figure it out what eventually we can do with this service. So even though I am actually a member of administrative groups over here, I cannot stop it. Yeah. So, like, what does it mean? Well, first of all, if we do SCSD show for Macafio, like this, and then in here we are getting the SDDL. SDDL stands for Security Definition Descriptive Language, and it describes us who can do what to the service. Now, whenever we are thinking about that, whether it's possible or not, then basically we've got in here the option to actually modify that particular SDDL. So how does it work? Here we've got a discretionary access control list. And then eventually we've got in here the statement that we've got a for allow and eventually D for deny. And then we've got WP, SD, WD, and so on. So what does it mean? It means that we've got over here WP, that stands for stop the service, SD, that's standard delete, WD, write duck, and WO, write owner. Yeah. So this is something that we need to also understand, because that defines us who can do what to the particular service. So in here, what we will need to do, because if I would like to stop that service as a system, then eventually I will need to probably change this A over here, but that won't work because that particular system, even though explicitly being allowed, it's also a member of authenticated users. But funny part about Windows security is that we are able to set up permissions in a following way. Most of the people will say that in Windows deny wins, and that's actually not true. What wins, it's what's first on the list. So if I would update the SDDL string this way, even though system is denied, system and a build and administrator would be allowed because authenticated users is allowed, and it's actually first one on the list. So what I will do over here, I will do Control A, Control C, like this. And then in as a system over here, because I have a console running like this, I will do SCSD set Magafio, like this. And then we're going to paste it. And then, as you can see, we've got the service security settings stopped. And even though I'll come back to the service itself, then I will try to stop it, not stop Macafio, and then basically I'm able to stop the service. So this is how you are able to stop the antivirus if antivirus relies particularly on the service. Yeah, so this is basically the concept. Now, what is kind of interesting over here is that we've got a possibility as well to eventually evaluate whether the service is stoppable or not. And let me show you. If I do not start this time Macafio, like this, then basically CLS, then question is, of course, can I verify that? And if I do SC query Macafio, then here you've got stoppable, pausable, and accepts shutdown. Yeah, so we are able to see that that service, it's totally stoppable eventually. Yeah. Now the question of the universe will be, can I, for example, compare it with some other concept of antivirus? And that's something that I would like to show you over here. And eventually that will be this one. And this is my local console. I will do SC query Macafio like this, and then eventually, not Macafio, but sense. Then eventually you've got not stoppable, not pausable, ignores shutdown. And I'm not saying that here I'm actually querying the Defender ATP. I'm not saying that this one is better. I'm just saying that eventually over here we've got a situation that one service is programmed to not to be stopped, and another service is actually programmed to be stopped eventually, or there is nothing done around that particular service that is preventing it from actually stopping it. Yeah, so this is basically the difference. So what's my point is that during the attack, in order to be able to defend the endpoint, and not only of course vulnerability management is important, but also what is important is to, and not also privilege management is important, but also what is important is the holistic approach to the workstation security, to verify what kind of things potentially could be brought into the field. Like for example, this one in here, we're able to see that that particular service has been stopped. So long story short, this is basically the possibility that we got, and eventually here we are able to set up that we've got a service that is possibly stoppable. Okay, so we got this. Now the next part that we will take into consideration, it's related with eventually the situation where we are able to analyze the workstation from the perspective of the whitelisting. Yeah, and what we're gonna test, it will be the phishing and evil jinx, and phishing and evil jinx, or evil jinx in general. That is the solution that allows us to create an effective phishing campaign that will eventually allow us to eventually to send emails. Yeah, so this is the setup. Now whenever we are thinking about the whole situation within the evil jinx, let's have a look first at the statistics that are important here to verify basically what kind of options we've got from the phishing perspective. We've got a Verizon Data Breach Investigations report, and these guys say that if an attacker sends an email to 100 people in the company, yeah, then 23 people will potentially open it, yeah, and then eventually the next part is related with 11 people that will eventually open the attachment, and 6 will do it within the first hour. So having this statistic in mind, what is important for us to observe is that phishing in general, when it's prepared and when eventually it reaches a destination, that is something that could be potentially successful. And this is an example of phishing that one of our customers got, and this is a financial company. And what happened over there is that users' document, they've been encrypted, and this was like a central server for the traders. And then what happened next, basically we've got documents of course encrypted, because user get an email that says, hey, someone left you a voice message on the Dropbox. So long story short, user click on this email, that was a voice message.wave.exe. Actually, that was literally the name of the file, even though in the subject it's different. And then user fired it up, and because the known file extensions are hidden, then eventually we are able to run that particular software without really feeling that we are doing something wrong. So that could be potentially the case. Now phishing, it's not only of course about running stuff, which I will also show you, but it's also related with the credential theft, and that's this evil jinx that I wanted to present. So what you guys see on the screen right now, it's a situation where eventually we've got an email.
Paula, we're having some difficulties with your connection. If you please give us a few seconds till we arrange the problem we're having. Can you hear me, Paula, okay? We're having some technical difficulties. Please understand, it is all live, so these are things which unfortunately happen, especially now with the new challenges we have over webinars, net. Let me just see if... Okay, Well, we have an issue, Paula, with the connection from your side. Worry in the meantime until we re-establish connection with Paula. I'm sure all of you are getting very interested. I was myself, I must admit, sitting down there on the chair, very attentively looking at what Paula was showing us, because it's quite interesting where they are. It's of getting in that you don't think about, and if you know about these, let's say, loopholes, or you know about these situations, you are able to defend yourself from the situations. In fact, this goes back to the word when people ask me, like, what does ethical hacking actually mean? I mean, if you look at what ethical hacking actually is, it's a situation where if you know the mind of a hacker, if you know the ways a hacker can go in to your PC, obviously, then you are be able to stop that person. That is what basically ethical hacking is teaching you about. And this is what the situation where Paula is kind of demonstrating us certain vulnerabilities, certain situations where obviously you may be vulnerable, because if you know about them, then obviously you can protect yourself towards these situations. I always say a phrase which I like to use a lot, where if it's made by a man, it can be undone by another. This is like a lock, a padlock in a door. One person can make it, there is going to be that other person somewhere who will be able to pick it. It's the same thing with security, programming, all sorts of systems we create. They're all man-made until now. Maybe AI in the future are already starting to create them themselves, but the idea is that basically if it's made by a man, it can be hacked by another. So that is why it is all important to be on top of the ball. We're now going to see a short clip. When we come back from the clip, we'll reconnect with Paula and we'll carry on with a very interesting conversation. So let's watch a short clip. So we're back. I think we've managed to arrange the connection with Paula. We're having an issue with the internet on her side. Paula, let me please confirm, are you hearing me all okay? Are you managing to hear me well?
Yes, I am. Apparently, there was some case with the internet access. I switched to the backup connection, then it's good.
There you go. It's always good to have a backup in for everything. So Paula, I'll leave the floor to you again to carry on. I'm going to go back to my chair because I was very, very interested. So I'm going to go and keep following.
Okay, thanks a lot. So you guys see right now on the screen where eventually you are able to see the hackers console. And within this particular hackers console, what we're going to be doing, we're going to be actually setting up, you can see the IP address, we're going to be setting up a situation where a hacker is going to run Evil Jinx, and that is the software that eventually helps us out to move further, and eventually we'll be able to create a malicious phishing campaign that we're going to be leveraging here. So this is something, guys, that you eventually need to also observe, that even though here we've got like some campaign.
Unfortunately, we're still having some issues with the connection, Paula. I don't know if it is something to do with the internet speed, but unfortunately, we're getting your screen, but your voice is breaking up. But in the meantime, until we try and solve this issue, because I'm sure there are many people out there who would like to carry on hearing your presentation, Paula. I'm one of them, so we are going to find a way to solve this. I would like to just remind the people that are watching us that we are basically today doing an event which is a full webinar about cybersecurity. We've started the day by looking at it from the executive perspective and looking at the possible threats that are out there and how companies are vulnerable to all sorts of things. It was quite an eye-opener, actually, to see what the vulnerabilities that are out there. And now this afternoon, we have looking into a more, let's say, we're diving deep. We're diving deep to the techie side, but we're seeing Paula hands-on, showing us some examples of how hackers can hack into your system and possible vulnerabilities which can be available in any form of office and system. I mean, this is the thing, is we live in a connected world. Everything is connected, and there is the great advantages to that, but there's also the disadvantages where once everything is connected, if someone finds that loophole, and then they can get in, and once they're in, they can do what they want. We saw an example where Paula said where a simple email was sent, and the email said that you have a voice message which has been left for you on Dropbox. The subject of the email, the name was .wave, which is a standard format, which we would know it would be a WAV file, so we would think nothing malicious about it. But then the actual file itself was named .wave.exe. By default, most of our Windows systems are set to hide hidden standard extensions of files. So when you see the file, you won't see that .exe file, thinking it's a WAV file. Once you double click it, it actually is a program which is going to run in the background, which then is obviously going to open you up to any form of attack. It could be encrypting your data. I mean, the encrypting of data nowadays has become very, very popular amongst hackers. I think they're letting me know that we seem to be back on, Paula. I will, hopefully this time we're okay. I'll give you back the feed.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Go ahead.
I hope all is good now. Absolutely. Thank you so much for this. So long story short, we've been talking about the credentials theft. So when the user clicks on the link, then eventually something is happening, and then eventually user can provide credentials, and then long story short, we are able to capture those. But what I would like to show you, following up on this one, so when we're going to send that kind of a phishing email, then there could be a link, or there could be also an attachment where user eventually would be able to at that certain point to click, and then something's going to happen. What I would like to show you as well as part of the example over here would be simply the demonstration of the user's computer, where eventually while we are managing to get access to the user's computer, then the next stage is that we are actually able to steal credentials that are by this or for this user. So long story short, what is the setup is that we would like to right now begin and see how the whole situation looks from the data protection API perspective. So here we go. We are right now at the user's computer, and over here we've got in here the Freddy Krueger. So let's just log this guy. And I would like to log into the Freddy Krueger's computer with the password. So let's do it this way, password p at ssw0rd. So we got this. And user logged in like this. So eventually when the user is logging in like this, and when the hacker also has access to the computer in the name of the user, then over here, a hacker is able to read all of the secrets of that particular user. Now, happy to tell you, of course, everything about that, because within the data protection API, that is something that our team has reverse engineered. And everything, like for example, if you store password in Chrome or something like this, then you can see that there is actually Chrome Pass, which is a completely different application, which allows us to at that certain stage get the password from Google Chrome. Now, question of score, of course, would be what next? Yes, so eventually how we are able to extract it by, for example, being somewhere else. And it really depends really who is accessing our infrastructure and how, because in terms of privilege access, that kind of a passwords stored in the browser, that is creating even a bigger problem. And let me show you the scenario where we're going to learn what kind of problem that potentially could be. So at that certain stage, what I will do, I will within the console, search for the passwords, and console doesn't have to be as an administrator or anything like this. It could be as a regular user. So I would like to search in here for solutions for places where potentially passwords could be stored. Now I'm going to use for that reason my favorite tool, which is called CQDP API blobsearcher.exe, and then I'm going to specify the directory where I'm going to use users, and then eventually I'm going to specify Freddy Krueger, app data, local, and then Google, and then Chrome, and then basically recursive search, and then output CQ tools is going to be the output, and then dp_api.txt. So what this tool allows me is to search for all of the literally possible secrets that are particularly stored in a Google Chrome, but we could run the search on the C drive that user might be potentially storing. So just imagine, like, that will be the first thing if I will be on a bedside that I will check for. I will actually go to the certain place, certain computer, and then extract everything that I can. Now there's a tool, by the way, called lasagne, like a pasta, that allows us to eventually display or extract secrets from all of the possible places within Windows client, and DP Blob Searcher is doing something similar. Yeah. So anyway, let's have a look what we got. So we are querying DP txt, yeah, like this one, and then in here, yeah, we've got the master key GUID, that's B55 something something. That master key is the one that we are using for possibly getting access to that particular secret that's stored within the Google Chrome. And then, long story short, that particular master key will be something that we're going to be decrypting. Now, let me show you this one, percent updata percent. And over here, we've got Microsoft, we've got Protect, and then eventually we've got SID, and then we've got here B55. So that's this one, B55. Now that B55 is the one that we will need to decrypt as a user from the outside of the user's workstation. So what I would like to do, first of all, I will restart this workstation. We can do this demonstration, by the way, both online and offline. I'm going to do it offline because it's going to be more straightforward, more linear, and that is something that is also quite interesting to observe. It's going to be more clear when I will explain it this way. So right now we are rebooting this particular workstation, and then the next stage over here. So let's dig in. Would be to eventually boot it from the ISO image. Yeah. So let's do it at that moment. Here we go. So I'm just gonna quickly reset it. Yeah, here we go. That's the one. Yep, yeah. Okay, press any key. We are doing this right now. And then the next stage would be to override cache logon data to be actually able to log on with a different password to that user workstation. And the reason why we are doing this is that I want to show you that if you do not know the user's password, if you are not acting as a user, so potentially you have used the vulnerability, but you are not a user, then the question would be what kind of possibilities you might have. Okay, so that is something as well that is for us important to observe. Now, long story short, when we've got here a possibility, so let's reboot this workstation. We're gonna be getting into the user's login, and then eventually we're gonna be while booting from the workstation, we're gonna be changing that offline. Yes, so that will be the setup. So right now we are getting into the um, Windows PE. And at that stage, we're going to be leveraging, of course, the situation where we will be able to override cache logon data of that particular user. Yeah. So here we go. Okay, so we are right now within the Windows PE. We're going to go to repair your computer. Mhm. And then troubleshoot, advanced options, command prompt, and in here, we can get into one more thing, which is our tools. So let's go to the D drive, CQ tools, and then eventually let's go to the Kiwi Secure Edition. And within this area, we're going to run Mimikatz, but that's the Mimikatz Secure Edition, which means it's not recognized by antivirus. And this is also the module that I'm going to be using over here that you guys are able to use for the cache logon data. So what I'm going to do for those who are watching as well online, let me enlarge the font a little bit so that you guys can see what's happening here. And then we're going to use that for this one, the command lsa dump cache, and then it's going to be the Windows system32 config system d Windows system32 config security and /kiwi. Yeah, and that's it. We are overriding thanks to this cache logon data. Now, if we go to File, Settings, yeah, and then we change the online or the network behavior, we will be able to log on with the cache logon data. Let's do it. Not connected. And here, not connected. And then basically we can just go like this, continue, and we move forward. Yeah. So that is basically the setup. Okay. So long story short, next part over here, it will be related with logging on with the user's credentials, yeah, at that stage. But for now on, we don't know the password, yes, so that is also quite a thing, because eventually here we're going to be logging on with the cache logon data, and having this in mind, we will be able to use and verify if we're able to see the secret, yeah. So that's what's happening right now. So we are rebooting this machine right now. Mhm. And then the next stage would be to dig into basically the content, and then to be able to see whether we are able to see the password of the user or not. But remember that even though like we've got some phishing activity over here, still from the user perspective, if the user opens up an email, opens up, clicks on the link, opens up attachment or anything like this, then you would be able basically at that point to act as a user. Then it means that you are able to see actually potentially users secrets, and that is something that is important as well to know. Now our precondition over here is that we've been able to get access to the user's secret because eventually um, we were able to do it because we were running things as user, yeah, so that's it. And it's all dependent on the user's password. Now if you do not know the user's secret user password, then you will not by default be able to get access to the user secret. But of course there are some preconditions that should be met potentially that will allow us as well to be able to get access to the user secret as well. So anyway, we're going to log in as Freddy in a second, and long story short, I would like to show you the scenario where we are able to log in over here as a user, but without the possibility to see the password. So we've got a Freddy Krueger password, enter, and then this should not work out because eventually we are disconnected from the network. That's good. And then over here we do mimikatz like this. Yeah, we did not, this is not our password, but we are logging in over here as a domain user with a different password. And that's because we have overwritten cache logon data. Cache logon data in the operating system, it is actually defined as a result of a PBK df2 function, which is, by the way, great because it allows us eventually to store secret information and verify based on the checksum verifies on a certain function in the pre-calculation whether the data we are providing is good or not. Yeah, so this is also something that we should take into consideration here. Okay, so long story short, we are right now getting into the client, Windows client over here, and the next stage is going to be to go to the CQ tools. Let's do it and open up Chrome Pass. Yeah, let's figure it out, and then basically we will be able to see whether we can see the password here or not. Yeah, so this is the setup. Okay, great. Now, also what is important for us to know that in the domain we've got a possibility, and this is also really good, to extract the key that will eventually allow us at that stage to get access to all of the possible secrets of the users. And when we take that into consideration, yeah, then basically it's especially interesting from the concept of the shadow IT scenario. So eventually, if we're going to go to the Chrome pass, let's do it this way first, and then we're going to decrypt the secret by using the key that I was mentioning over here. Okay, and eventually, as you can see, we've got here a situation where eventually we are still scanning for the passwords, and eventually it always takes a while because we have to decrypt all of the master keys that are protecting our secret. So here you've got no password, and now the question is how, from the secret, from the key perspective, we'll be able to get access to that particular password. And this is something that, by the way, our team has discovered. So happy, of course, to answer questions here. So we've got over here the momentum, where we're going to be extracting this particular CQDP API alpha secret dumper a key. This is what's happening from the domain on the domain controller level. Who can do it, you might be wondering, and who can do it is at that stage the user that is having a permission or privilege on the domain, which is called replicating directory changes and replicating directory changes all. So if you go to the CQLSA secrets dumper, we can go to File and then export that private key, export into exported PFX, and then we got this. And then let me import it actually, because it's very interesting, so that I'm able to show you. And then we go next, next, next. Then we specify the password for this one is going to be secure, CQURE, display password. So that's this one. If we go next, next, finish, import was successful. Okay, and then we can verify what kind of certificate is this. certmgr.msc, enter. And then if you go to personal certificates, there is a not available certificate. And that is really funny because eventually it's issued to nobody, issued by nobody. So that's the setup. And basically, we've got this one. And then if we go okay, then this is a certificate, by the way, that each of you, by the way, guys, you've got it in your domains, in your Active Directory domain controllers. And by the way, it's already expired. So if you have issued, if you have set up your domain, let's say 1 year ago, then it's possibly still running. But if you set up your domain in 2003, even though you have upgraded domain controllers or whatever, it doesn't really matter. Yeah. So here we've got this situation. Anyway, okay. Is there something you can do about it? You might be wondering. An answer is no. Unfortunately, you cannot. The only thing basically you can do is to implement whitelisting on the domain controller level and control access and review the privileges that one could have in order to perform the replication on the domain controller level. So that's really the mitigation over here. So you cannot fix it, but you can build a wall around it. And that's what we are referring to. Anyway, over here on the Windows 10 client, we've got in here situation where we cannot see the password, right? But of course, our interest is to get access to the user's secret. Yeah. So let's give it a try. So we're gonna do it by getting into the tools. So let's get into the tools. Okay, and then over here, we're gonna run the tool, first of all, to generate our hash, current password hash, and our password is mimikatz. And that's gonna be our current password hash. So that's this one. Yep. And then the next part that we got, it's related with the CQ master key ID. Yeah, and then basically over here, what we're gonna do, remember this B55 master key? That is exactly something that we will be decrypting. So first of all, we're gonna specify here PFX, and that's the one that I have from the domain, new hash that I have over here. And so what we are doing right now, we're gonna be decrypting the particular master key that we have from here. We're gonna be decrypting it, and then we're gonna be with the certificates, and then we're going to be encrypting it with the current password hash. So that's basically this one. And then we've got over here B55, that's this one, shift right click, copy as path, that's this. And then in here, we're going to specify a file, and then we're going to decrypt it with the certificate, with the private key, and encrypt it back with the password hash. Now, what happened over here? There is a new file that we have placed, so we can rename it and name it, let's say, good. And then basically AD modified, rename it. And then basically we got this. Yeah, so this is the situation that we are referring to. Now, this particular one is without the parameter system and hidden. So let's give it to those parameters. And then, long story short, in here, while we have already decrypted it and encrypted it back again, when I click F5 for the refresh, you are able to see the password of this particular user that we got in here. Yeah. So long story short, just to summarize, we were able, thanks to the possibility to get the private key from the domain, to know the secret of the user and to decrypt the secret of the user, which is in this particular case password in a Google Chrome. But then eventually we were able to perform that activity, and then right now we got access to the user's password. The conclusion on the top of the overall domain level, it is actually related with the fact that if you got access to this private key that I was showing you guys, then you got access to the literally full and everybody's secrets within the whole domain. So that's why, especially right now, when we are taking into consideration the remote work and the security of the workstation, if someone manages to be on that user workstation, and that sometimes we are not controlling the access to, as I was mentioning, over 40% of people, they are allowing to use that particular device for someone else, and that's potentially the personal device, then basically that kind of situation could be potentially a threat. Now, what's the solution for this? Well, it depends on what we are talking about. If we are talking about a workstation that potentially could be managed over here, so it could be a member of the domain simply, or so business laptop, or it could be as well our personal workstation that we are managing within the bring your own device policy. Then one of the best things to actually set up over here is to set up not only the possibility of whitelisting, so things like app locker, application control, and so on, but also one of the best ones, which is related with the attack surface reduction rules that could be potentially introduced within the exploit guard. So this is one of the demonstrations here. Now, when the user gets an email, yeah, and that's potentially the phishing email, of course, question is what can happen. So either we are able to steal credentials, as I was showing you at the very beginning of the presentation, and even though, for example, even for Chrome, we were, and that could be the next stage, we were able to extract users password, and then the next that we got, it's related with eventually the escalated attack where we are able to have a little bit more privileges eventually, and then we are able to steal secrets for all of the users. Now, what I would like to show you is also another image of that story, because in here you guys are able to see that we were able to get credentials of the user. Potentially, we next stage would be we are able to log in maybe to the user mailbox, and then eventually send emails in a phishing form to some other people. One thing would be to steal credentials, but second thing would be, for example, to get access to the user workstation. And this is something that I wanted to show you as well. So here, guys, you can see the hacker's perspective. That's the hacker's machine. And on the other side, you can see, guys, over here, the really nice looking Excel spreadsheet. Of course, it includes and it has the malicious macros. Of course, it does. But what I want to show you and why it's so mean, it's because in here you guys can see that this kind of columns, yeah, are representing us the image, the picture. Because if we have a closer look, you can see that, for example, for the K or L, in between K, L, A, and L column, there is a line, and that line does not really match the line in Excel, because that full thing, and let me enlarge it, it is actually an image. So if I enlarge it this way, you guys are able to see by the border over here that this is actually a picture, but we don't see it when we look at it this way. Now, if I do click on a link somewhere, not on a link, but on the whatever in whatever cell over here, then I've got here information about wrong number, yeah, whatever that means. But then later on, what's going to happen on the level of the workstation is that that workstation is going to be attacked. And in the moment, we're going to have a situation where potentially there is a connection being established to that particular hacker's machine. So this is also something that is quite interesting to see, because eventually we will be able here to observe that that connection, of course, is being established. Yeah, so this is the setup. Let me relaunch it. For some reason something went wrong apparently over here. Okay, wrong number, whatever. And then eventually we will be able to be reconnected to this particular well, in this case, this particular workstation of the hacker. So potentially that's what can happen. Now, funny part about that, and it takes of course a while, but yeah, let's give it a chance. Potentially, we will be, as I mentioned, to connect to this one, but we'll be able to run that particular shell as a regular user. Yeah. So this is basically what's happening. And what is happening right now within the memory of the operating system, we are actually running PowerShell that is potentially trying to target to connect to this to this particular client. And for some reason, I can see that we are listening here for the incoming connection, but we are not getting that. Okay, now okay, we could see that it was happening. So apparently we will need to rerun it, but we could see that we were here for some reason in C users Pula and then documents. Yeah, so this is basically what was happening on the side of PowerShell over here, and underneath we are actually running PowerShell. So that's absolutely interesting perspective over here. And having this in mind, this is basically not recognized by antivirus. And over here, we are also using our post exploitation library, and we've got a connection over here running. Fantastic, where we can do who am I. That post exploitation library will allow us to get access to the documents of the user. So that yet another, it's a reason for us to be able to move forward and then overuse the user's presence here. Yeah. Anyway, let's have a look. So the last thing that I wanted to show you is the possibility to actually exploit at that certain level PowerShell on the user's computer. Now we can already say that PowerShell constrained language would be actually something that would totally do the job over here, but who has this implemented? Not to mention the attack surface reduction rules within the exploit guard. If you do, fantastic, but in the vast majority of organizations that we have been engaged with, these guys simply don't have that. Yeah, so this is the setup. Now, if we do have a look in here at the server, I got here uploads. And over here, we're going to be playing with basically uploading the stuff that I will manage to get from the user workstation. So please have a look. First of all, I'm going to go and do the screenshot. Yeah, so I'm controlling the user workstation right now. And all of these things that we are talking about today are not only were related with stopping the antivirus, but they were also related with not allowing antivirus to discover us. So that's good. That's why whitelisting is a completely something that we will need to deal with. So right now we are doing the screenshot, and then eventually that particular screenshot will be published in that server. Yeah. So once it's done, we're gonna be loading it in here. Yeah. We got this. Okay. So let's do it. Mhm. And the next part is going to be related, for example, with the key recording, and also the possibility to at that stage replace, for example, clipboard. Yeah, so this is the setup. We can also take a picture from our camera. Yeah, so this is also the possibility, and then access and observe what user potentially is doing. So this is what I'm seeing on the screen literally right now. Yeah, so that's one of my windows that I'm sharing with you, and that's my window on the other side because I'm working with two screens. Okay, so here we go. Now the next part is related with the key recording. So let's do it. So I'm going to copy this one and then paste, and then starts key recording, and then I'm typing notepad, for example, and here I'm typing test, test, test. Yeah, so basically this kind of stuff, it's recorded as well in the background on the hacker's console. Yeah, so we're running it actually for 15 seconds, so this one should be done by now. And eventually in here on the server that belongs to the hacker, we are able to see of course that stuff. Yeah. Good. Okay, great. So the last part is related with the clipboard replacement, and this is something that's really good because it affects attacks the finance departments. And eventually, if we do paste over here, first, what I would like to show you is the demo document with the sample invoice. And within this demo document, we will be able to copy an invoice. So let me actually dig in and show you. And then that invoice account will be replaced on the fly. So here we've got account number, copy. Okay, and then basically we go to test, and then here we've got this account number. So it's all good, yeah, because it's the same, 81 something something. But when we replace the clipboard, yeah, on the hacker side, we will be able at that stage to also copy the account number and then see that this particular account number is replaced. Now, of course, how many times you've seen, guys, situation where that happened? Yes, because this does not require any of the administrative privileges. Eventually, what it actually requires is just to be a regular user, because user simply has access to the clipboard, and the user has a possibility to put and change the things in the clipboard, and then eventually we are able to proceed like this. Okay, anyway, so let's see. Sometimes this attack, it's taking a little bit of a longer time, but that's all right. We are controlling the user's workstation right now, and our post-exploitation library, it's compiled within the memory, and therefore it's also not recognized as antivirus. But long story short, this is also something that allows us to see how easy is to impact attack users computer. So let's see what we're gonna get in here, and then eventually we're gonna be replacing this particular clipboard. Yeah, so we got this now. Okay, so let's give it a chance, of course. But eventually, you know the drill, you know the concept. We've got here a situation where eventually we will be able to copy, of course, the account that is given over here. And what's so good about this attack is that within this attack we are kind of, in a sense, bypassing the concept of confirming the transfers with the message. Yeah, so this is basically the setup. Yeah, so yeah, pretty much that's it. Now, whenever we are, of course, thinking about some other aspects, yes, of cybersecurity within the organization, what we definitely need to take into consideration is the security of what kind of things we should implement. And one of the things, to summarize, that will be definitely whitelisting. But another part, it's the exploit guard with the attack surface reduction rules. Currently, we could say it is the thing to do. And if you are searching for the quick steps to do even tomorrow, then that will be actually attack surface reduction rules, because these are the ones that eventually we could play with. And when we look at the concept, how do they look? They basically look like this. So on the picture over here, you've got that set MP preference. So you just enable the attack surface reduction rules, and then eventually you can search for that ready, because this is already predefined in Windows. You don't configure anything. You just enable a certain rule, and that rule identifier that you are able to see, you are literally able to find on a docs.microsoft.com within the internet, and then you decide what would you like to have. For example, see, when I was clicking on this link, on this image in the Excel spreadsheet, that created a child process, which was the PowerShell. Yeah. Now in here, within the rules, you are able to prevent creation of the child processes. Also, if, for example, you've got a situation where you are compiling PowerShell within the memory of the operating system, like for this CQ post exploit library that we are talking about, then you also over here have a possibility to configure and prevent it by enabling it this way. Yeah, so this is basically the perspective over here that we got. So long story short, you are able at that certain moment to impact the security of how things are executed on the user computer with the literally minimal or even no cost, because this solution is free. So let's summarize it for today. So we've been using evil jinx in order to steal credentials from the user. Yeah, user could eventually click on the link that was not considered safe. Yeah, so to us, of course. Yeah, but eventually if we enable safe links within our email solutions, then basically these links are checked for the reputation. And of course, there are new links popping up. So we're kind of relying on machine learning and statistics, but eventually we are minimizing the risk. And that's important stuff over here. Multi-factor authentication, absolutely, it's a must, especially for the VPN solutions, also for our remote access, because that prevents password spraying, that prevents also situations like giving credentials out, because even though there was multi-factor authentication enabled, then if user would give credentials, then what would happen? A hacker will not be able to log on because he will need to provide a short message. Now, exploit guard with the attack surface reduction rules, that is something that definitely helps out over here, because we are able to prevent creating the child processes from the, for example, Office documents, and at the same time whitelisting, because if, for example, we run applications like Lazan or like Chrome Pass that I was showing you guys, then you won't be able to do it, because eventually, even though we are able to get access to the secrets of the user, then how would you do it if you are not allowed to run software that we don't know? So this is a holistic approach and the concept of how we should approach the workstation security today. So if you guys would like to get the tools that I was showing you, then basically on our blog, secureacademy.com /blog, eventually you are able to see the tools basically that we have used during this presentation, including the data protection API tools. So thank you so much for listening. Apologies for the technical issues, but I hope we managed to keep it up, and eventually we did what we wanted to do. So thank you so much for your patience, and I hope, of course, that you have enjoyed it.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you very much. That was extremely interesting. I can tell you from my side, you had a lot of eyes glued to the screens here. I mean, it's amazing how in a short period of time you managed to show certain vulnerabilities, which are obviously a great danger to many people who are conscious and very obviously take care of all their personal data. Now, Paula, please don't go, because you will be joining us on our next panel. In fact, the next panel is going to be called the Shifting Sands of Cybersecurity. For this panel, we have Ms. Paula Janeskovic. We also have Mr. George Balifotus. George is a technical delivery manager at Microsoft with extensive with extensive cybersecurity experience. He has functioned as a cybersecurity architect across EMEA, supporting governments, banks, and pharmaceutical companies to enhance their cybersecurity capabilities, and leads the company's worldwide cybersecurity champion program, which numbers approximately 150 cybersecurity champions globally. George holds an MBA from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, MSc in Computer Science from Northern Illinois University, and BSc in Mathematics from the National University of Athens. He also holds the Security International main certificates like GCIH, CCSP, CRICS, CISM, CISSP, and GAWN, amongst others. That was quite a mouthful as well there. Also on our panel, we have Mr. Robert Muscat. Robert Muscat is currently a specialist in the security engineering section within the Information Security and Governance Department at MITA. In his role, Robert is primarily responsible to provide directions on assessment methodologies used to analyze the functions and components of current and proposed systems within governments, to assess their exposure against the current threat landscapes at the architectural level. To moderate this very interesting, I'm sure, discussion is going to be Mr. Ruben Gauci, who is a Security Operations Manager at MITA. Ruben?
Thank you, Ian. Welcome. It's my absolute pleasure to moderate today's technical panel. Today we'll be discussing how digital transformation, driven by the need for businesses to become more agile and adaptable, has led to the progressively evolving cyber threat landscape. I'm sure that this panel will contribute to many meaningful discussion, with the ultimate objective to provide meaningful actions and recommendations that organizations can use to protect, detect, and respond to today's emerging threats. Before we start, I would like to thank our panelists who are lending their expertise and are willing to share their views on this very important domain. I would also like to remind our webinar audience that at the end of this session, we'll be having a live Q&A session. Our team is constantly monitoring the live chat, so please jot down any questions you might have for our panelists. Let's kick off the panel with a couple of introductory questions. In brief, describe what was your first touch point with cybersecurity and how does it relate to your work today? We may start with George.
Of course. Hi, everybody. So that's a great question, especially for people of any age who are interested in considering cybersecurity. I was very much into PC hardware and software back when MS-DOS and Windows 3.1 were all the rage. And I started looking at security when I was doing my MS degree in computer science. The world was changing and getting more connected. So it was fascinating to me in order to look at how can you protect somebody when their house might be invaded. From that point on, as you start going into cybersecurity, you keep investing and you keep growing, and the more knowledge you obtain, the more capable you're doing of taking on new things. But I do want to highlight one thing. It's, in my opinion, you should not only focus on security, not having one area to look at. A more varied skill set can make a big difference for somebody. In my case, I also studied business and worked as a business manager. So I rounded out my approach in that set. If somebody doesn't know whether they're a good fit for cybersecurity, I recommend a book called Cybersecurity, The Beginner's Guide. It's written by Erdal Ozkaya, Erdalozkaya, and it's a fantastic overview for considering what you need to do for security. And congratulations to Cybersecurity Malta as well for making efforts like this, which all the people working tirelessly in order to make it easy for people to look at the threats, understand the emerging threats, both companies and citizens understand it better. And this is critical for making a society with better online protection.
Thank you, George. Same question for you, Paula.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the very good question. Well, long story short, I started cybersecurity and I'm in the field for the past 15 years. And what is interesting about it is that this industry is pretty much never changing. From one perspective, hackers are always there, threats are always there, and the only thing we need to do is to be up to date, and that's what's changing absolutely every day. And I started in cybersecurity when I was, I think we could say that a kid, because I was always interested in computers. I had my first computer some time ago, and when I was a kid, and I was always digging into the various subjects of that, and then basically practice. So I digged in here, over there. I managed to get access to this certain area of the network and this particular host and so on. So this was basically something that was very engaging. I think that to be in cybersecurity business, you need to be something that I always call hyperactive, meaning you need to be eager to learn every day. And that's pretty much something that represents my start. I was just learning every day about what's out there in cybersecurity. I was working in the consulting company as a cybersecurity consultant, not only doing pen tests, but also doing PKI implementations. One of my specialities is actually this one as well, and also things related with the big web server farms. So that was my part. And cybersecurity basically was always there, but then I decided to do only pen tests and cybersecurity research, and then I set up the team 12 years ago. Right now, we are 40 people spread it across like 4 locations in the world, 4 offices. And what I can say, because there are lots of questions for people how to start, yeah. And I think the easiest way to start, from my perspective, is to learn as much as we can about internals of the operating system. I find it very useful at my everyday tasks from the practical perspective. For example, knowing how Linux exactly works, knowing how Windows exactly works. There's a really good book by Mark Russinovich, which is called Windows Internals. So in our team, if someone wants to be a part of technical team, this is mandatory to read it, and we're going to ask questions about it during the interview. So, so that later when you are performing penetration tests and when you are trying to get this perspective, then even though something is there that you don't know, you know it because you were able to conclude based on a super deep knowledge that you got. So this is what builds up a really good feeling to have, that when you were getting into the unknown area, you were like, okay, but that works this way, that works that way. So Windows internals, it's absolutely a great start. And then the rest just comes over if we are updating ourselves in cybersecurity field.
Thank you very much, Paula, for that answer. Same question goes for Robert. May I remind you to be a bit in brief in your answers, because we're a bit tight in time. Robert?
At the time, I didn't know that it was related to cybersecurity. I was at school learning how to set up a Windows VPN server that could offer security controls. After setting up the usual routing and remote access server, we proceeded to implement a network policy server, which amongst other features handles network access policies, something which I came across later in the career by using the access protocols, which is Microsoft implementation of network access control. It's basically network access protection. It's a health enforcement solution, which in a nutshell allows you to set policies for users connecting to your network, obviously by VPN. Such conditions that we've set and I became familiar, and it was basically my first touch point, were that such systems to connect through VPN had to be updated with the latest patches and also running current antivirus software. Obviously back then, being naive, I used to think that such enforcement policies were basically an overkill, as you would expect that organizations operate on clean systems, having rigorous patch management strategies and also good governance. But what I can say is 7 years later, I still come across situations whereby organizations are not aware of critical patches which require immediate attention on the same systems that keep their operations ongoing. Fortunately enough, I also, through MITA, had the opportunity to see these systems evolve, specific features such as having to set security profiles according to the geographical location. So yes, basically that's it.
Robert, another common question to all the panelists. Cybersecurity incidents appear to be escalating in frequency, duration, and complexity. Hardly a day goes by without having a new story about another breach or another sophisticated cyber attack. Is cybersecurity keeping pace with technology? George?
I can also add that cybersecurity incidents are increasing in visibility. So more companies are willing to announce they had an issue and start doing the right things for their customers. That's a combination of proper regulation, of course, and companies feeling they're not the first or the last to have an issue. So look, cybercrime is a business, and any business, cyber criminals have to innovate. They have to be very resourceful in order to be profitable and successful. And here we're talking about having also an opportunistic nature. So you could also see what they did with COVID, where they capitalized on fear related to that. So considering all these things, you're very right to ask about defenders keeping up the pace. Look, I can't cover every area under attack. So I'll pick machine learning as an example. So cyber criminals, as you may know, have started attacking machine learning extensively, and this process is called adversarial machine learning. So they do poisoning attacks. They impact the training phase of machine learning to get their intended results. They do model stealing. So they construct careful queries to recover the machine learning model used by the defender. They do model inversion. Essentially, they try to uncover secret features in the model by, again, doing careful queries. So how do you protect from that? What do companies need to do and why? So machine learning is expected to increase in pace by 39% or so on an annual basis. The adoption of it by companies. So the right thing for defenders to do is do the right threat modeling on machine learning systems, just as you would with any other software, and to make sure that your security analysts are able to respond to such attacks. Also have a bug bar, like Microsoft Bug Bar, so they can classify vulnerabilities based on the effect and categorize and respond accordingly.
Thank you, George. Paula? Untick the mute button, please, Paula, because we are not hearing you at all.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I was just mentioning the statistics that are happening from February 2020 to March 2020. It has been measured that the amount of attacks has increased by 569%, while if it's about ransomware samples, they have increased by 72%. So that's basically what we are dealing with right now. Attacks are delivered in the same way as always, because code has to execute, links needs to be clicked, attachments, they need to be opened. But on the other hand, it's just more of those. So there's a higher chance that we're going to become a target of what is happening right now in the world. And I don't want to be here traumatizing, but if, for example, we were never a target of various attacks and we were thinking, okay, well, that's kind of okay because it's happening to everybody else, this time is definitely the time that can cause us to be particularly a target. And attacks, of course, are becoming more sophisticated, but there's a certain level of sophistication we can get to. Yes, when we are talking about the mass activity of hackers and different attacks that can happen to vast majority of organizations in the world, then these attacks, even though they can vary, it could be an executable or certain VBS script or PowerShell and so on, at the end, it's all predictable. And technology that we got right now allows us to create a very comfortable zone that is minimizing the risk and totally raising the bar for hackers. But that technology has to be well configured and it needs to be in place. And that is basically one of the biggest challenges that we got right now, that, for example, even within the Windows platform, I was mentioning on the presentation, the exploit guard. That's something that's out there. It's great. It protects us from the zero-day vulnerabilities, but in vast majority of organizations, we cannot see it turn on in place and configured. It's just there because it's there, but there's nothing really happening around the configuration around it. So attack surface reduction rules I was mentioning, they're there, but they're not turned on. So technology that we have right now, it's really nice. It's just that we need to make a step to configure it, or at least to review the configuration.
Thanks, Paula. Robert?
If we look back at the cyber grocery list back in the 90s of an IT manager, we could see that obviously they utilized solutions such as firewall, antivirus solutions, VPNs, and for that geeky IT manager, maybe an IDS solution. Fast forward to today, we have next generation everything, web application, firewalls, ID and access management solutions, there's identity. We have dynamic application, security testing, endpoint detection and response, name it, you have it. So from a technology perspective, also with the help of artificial intelligence, we are gaining mileage, and along the years gained also some mileage there. But we must remember that humans, as long as humans will continue to produce software and systems and use them, weaknesses will be present. And apart from having cybersecurity focusing only on technology, I think it also has to focus on people and processes, those aspects which in the cybersecurity versus technology race, I think those two aspects are currently the pain points. How can the gap be shortened? So basically, organizations need to make security as an intrinsic property of both systems and any processes that they create, which we call basically security by design. These can be embedded and obviously included in project teams through awareness and training, contrary to what we encounter unfortunately with project teams, that security is only involved in the last phases of the development life cycle. So security has to be infused in all stages since its inception, of the development life cycle. Adding to this, the shift in mentality of organizations from considering them as not being targets and that they won't have any incidents on their infrastructure because they think their data is not important, to an assume breach mentality where organizations will recognize that systems will fail or people will make errors. And basically adversaries will eventually penetrate their infrastructure. So with that particular shift in mentality, it will also help lessen the amount of breaches we encounter.
A question for George now. What are the most common cyber threats faced by businesses today, and what challenges do businesses face in assessing those threats and potential vulnerabilities? Are certain industries and organizations more vulnerable than others?
That's a good question, and you can't go into a comprehensive list within a panel discussion. I can tell you that the user is still under very heavy pressure to make a mistake, as mentioned by Paula, by Robert, by everybody on today's session. So our DCU, or the Microsoft Digital Crimes Unit, is seeing an amazing number of email-facilitated cybercrime. Credential phishing, so you're trying to get the user credentials in order to impersonate them, but also business email compromise, BEC, which means that is essentially impersonating somebody else, like your CEO or somebody from accounting, to send an email in order to convince the employee to make an action, send money, or provide some corporate secrets that they normally would not if it wasn't somebody they consider trusted. So this business email compromise, along with credential phishing, those two types of attacks are very prevalent, and of course, a lot of companies are subject to it. Challenges, well, it's about adopting the recommendations, like adopting MFA, multi-factor authentication, patching consistently, modernizing your VPN infrastructure, using the right threat protection technologies, doing proper backups, making sure they work. All those things are things that companies struggle with in one way or another. But if they take care of these basics, including configurations and making sure that there are no misconfigurations in their environment, if you do those, you've got a lot of the basics covered. As for the most vulnerable organizations, it's not a category, it's not an industry specifically. It's the organizations that even today believe they're not an interesting target, and they don't give the right budget to the security team to protect, detect, and respond from issues.
George, another question for Paula now. Paula, we see a lot of money now being invested by businesses and industries in cyber and data security. So why do the bad threat actors keep on winning battles, compromising and stealing unfathomable amounts of data? I think you're on mute, Paula. Thank you.
It's a really good question, actually, because when we take into consideration the money spent versus things being misconfigured, then we'll still obviously get a problem. Yeah. So we've got actually the customer that when we were starting the cooperation with these guys at the very beginning, just to give you an example of this, they actually said that they have 3 anti-spam filters. So I kind of joked a little bit and I said, why don't you have 7? And they were like, why 7? And I was like, obviously I'm kidding, because why do you need to actually have 3? Isn't it enough to have 1 but configured well? Well, and they were like, okay, but like, how can we assure that it has a good configuration? Well, there's a certain set of events, as I was mentioning, that can happen, yeah? And of course, it's a lot. That's why we've got right now intelligent threat detection that is relying on the machine learning, yes? But that is exactly why we've got problems. So we've got lots of solutions that we might potentially have, but eventually they are misconfigured, or we are not connecting the dots. I'm always saying that, for example, in cybersecurity, everything might be great, but there's one thing that might be disturbing the whole image, and then through that one thing, you will be able to get access to the other components of the infrastructure. So that's really about that. Therefore, administrators have really hard, or cybersecurity experts have really hard job to be done to make sure that all of these points of entries are actually mitigated, while hacker has only one thing to do, to find that one weak spot and then overuse it. So that's the reason why the attack happens, because we missed that one spot. That's why it's so important to perform regular penetration tests and get this external verification. It could be even by our internal team that's done, but in general, the perspective of someone who is acting, is putting the hacker's shoes, so that we are able to point these things that potentially could be vulnerable.
Thank you for that answer, Paula. And a question for Robert now. Given the current threat landscape, how can organizations defend themselves, and what measures they should take that will help them increase their cybersecurity posture?
So, to increase cybersecurity posture, I think the National Institute of Standards and Technology created a very good framework called the Cybersecurity Framework, where they've broken down functions and activities required to increase the cybersecurity posture and be well prepared. An organization would need to form what we call a cybersecurity program. And through their framework, NIST provided a number of recommendations which take a risk-based approach, which also use risk management processes to enable organizations inform and prioritize decisions regarding cybersecurity. I know it's going to take some time to arrive to the tangible items, but the build-up here is very important. To start with, organizations would require to start profiling their cybersecurity posture by cross-checking a number of recommended processes, such as having an asset management solution, such as performing threat modeling, having governance in place, having detection and disaster recovery processes, etc. And given that cybersecurity is basically everyone's priority and is a shared responsibility, here we need all the departments to work together and assist in determining the current cybersecurity posture of an organization. And then through a risk assessment, the organization would be able to determine its risk tolerance vis-a-vis its business processes and identify gaps from the current cybersecurity posture to one which they desire, which we call the desired state. And from there, they can start to prioritize cybersecurity tasks and also expenditure, which leads them to what we call the action plan, where the action plan will address shortcomings identified in this gap analysis and would basically set a roadmap for reducing cyber risk. And all these activities and functions would basically fall under five pillars, which NIST called them the identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. To explain some activities, just to have an idea about what these activities would basically consist of. For example, under the protect pillar, you would have the implementation of an enterprise-wide information security awareness and training, while, for example, also having the maintained configuration baseline for the systems that coexist in your environment. So these pillars help set up a proactive and agile mechanism, while also plan to, an effective response strategy, which through also the assistance of a security engineering function, keep mechanisms up to date. Finally, just to close up this particular section, it's also important to adopt a zero trust approach, meaning that you assume no implicit trust granted to assets and user accounts based on their physical location and also the ownership of such assets. This helps set also the correct mindset in increasing the cybersecurity posture.
Thank you, Robert. George, from your experience, how do you rank businesses when it comes to cybersecurity preparedness? Do businesses know what they need to do in order to ensure that their preparedness is up to the task of managing complex threats?
Yeah, good question. It's difficult to rank businesses, though, in terms of preparedness. So I can talk about industries that are a lot of scrutiny by attackers, and that's those industries that are under attack and a lot of scrutiny are the ones that can that frequently wire large payments or have access to sensitive information. So the businesses that have to be very, very, very careful are the consulting and accounting companies, chemicals companies, legal services, healthcare, real estate. All those wire a lot of money or have sensitive information, so they need to be careful. Now, what can they do to increase their preparedness? Robert just mentioned it, zero trust principles. So if you verify explicitly, use least privilege access, you assume breach, that's the right mindset to have in order to be successful and be able to have the team that can prepare you for the future. We talked about the evolving threats. The more you have the right mindset, you can adapt to the new technologies. So essentially, it's a philosophy that you need to follow and then adjust it to the technology.
Thank you, George. Paula, as a professional with security in mind, we both know that every second counts when dealing with a cyber attack. What are the most costly cyber incident response mistakes and how to avoid them?
There are many of those, of course, but eventually one of the biggest problems that we see that when we are performing the incident response is first of all backup that is either missing or not tested. Yeah. So eventually, when we need to recover very quickly from some kind of a failure, from some kind of an incident, we can do it, for example, within the backup location, even though things are absolutely bad, but eventually the concept is that we should be able to recover in some other place, in some other infrastructure, and that is something that keeps or makes our business going. But of course, from the forensic investigator perspective, one of the biggest mistake is to not to perform the memory dump. Even though we've got this possibility, sometimes we might be in a hurry, things are more important than this and so on, and then that's completely clear. But in most cases that we've been jumping into the organizations that needed incident response is that the memory dump after the attack was missing because, for example, administrators were trying to recover the business functionality in place. And therefore, the evidence was missing. We were not able 100% to conclude what happened. So I would technically name these two, but the number one, in my opinion, will be definitely backup.
Thanks, Paula. Definitely, backups are important duties to be taken care of by every organization. Robert, with the constant changes in the cybersecurity sphere, it is practically impossible to protect everything on a network from every emerging threat or close every vulnerability in real-time approach. How can a true risk assessment be carried out that is specific to a sector to identify their cybersecurity exposure?
So, another elaborate question. So first and foremost, to perform a risk assessment, you need to have an inventory of your assets that are currently on your network and on your environment. And obviously, you need to classify those assets according to their criticality to your business operations. Through discovery tools, these will help facilitate this process and also are vital to see the interaction between systems to have visibility. Because having no visibility means you cannot start to protect your environment. Then through a discovery phase, you would require to map out communications of major components in systems that will or already hold sensitive data that is important to your business. And by that, you will basically determine what we call the attack surface, which is basically entry points which are opportunities for attackers to exploit. Then we move on and use attack cases that leverage attack vectors, which are basically exploitation methods, using attack surface components which allow organizations to determine different threats on the environment. The next stage would be to perform threat analysis. From here, you would be able to determine the impacts such threats produce and also the likelihood for those threats which one would require to research correctly through threat intelligence to see if or when they can materialize. So by combining both the impact and likelihood of the number of threats, one would arrive to what we call the risk severity. Obviously, one would need to factor in the controls that are in place, since this will help also in prioritization of remediation activities. Additionally, so combining both discovery, analysis, and prioritization, this will feed the selection of appropriate security controls. And obviously, basically the assessment would align you with what controls you would need to tackle first. I wanted to also make a point with regards to vulnerabilities and prioritization, with regards to patch management strategies, because unfortunately we see a number of organizations that just assess a vulnerability and the risk it poses based on the severity provided by scoring and classification systems, which basically is not an ideal situation, since these only measure technical severity and not the risks that the actual vulnerabilities pose. So apart from vulnerability severity provided from these scoring and classification systems, one would also need to factor in the asset criticality that it poses to your environment, and also the external exposure. For example, if it is on the public internet, it would differ from having it on a closed environment. One would also need to perform threat intelligence to see if any threat events or threat sources are being generated, for example, through research for exploits, or for example, of particular groups that are discussing a particular exploit on social media platforms or closed groups, dark web, etc. And also important to track the vulnerability progress from the initial identification, availability, weaponization, and commoditization of exploit kits. So by that, one would be able to actually determine the risks from the vulnerabilities that a company identifies, and with prioritization, patch the most obviously critical vulnerabilities.
Thank you, Robert. Unfortunately, that was our last question for today's technical panel. I would like to thank all the panelists for their valuable insights, recommendations, and I would like to also thank MITA and Cybersecurity Malta for making this event possible. Ian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ruben, and thank you to all your guests. I can tell you, I want to use a term, maybe a bit of a techie term, I have a system memory overload right now because of the amount of information we have gone through today, which was very interesting. I want to remind everyone out there that if you to follow Cybersecurity Malta for more information on events like this, also to keep up to date with what's going on, and also to remember the most key factors which I think came out of this whole event is you need to keep up to date and you're learning every day. I'd like to close also by saying maybe something which is very important right now: stay safe in the real world, but stay safe also in the virtual world.